Good afternoon. Welcome to the last session of the Synthetic Landscape Lab end of winter term jury at the University of Innsbruck. I'm Professor Claudia Pasquero, Head of Institute of Urban Design and Chair of Landscape Architecture here. So today we will have a few courses. In the last 2 days we've seen courses that goes from diploma to pre-diploma, second year, third year and fourth year, as well as theory courses. This afternoon we will have a student from design 2, design 3 and 4 that are working together in a vertical studio, as well as the theory group. First of all, thanks a lot to our external guest, Dr. Melissa Sterry, which is founder of Bionic City, as well as internationally known researcher on the application of biology, biotechnology and design to the future of cities, as well as Anna-Rita Papeschi. Anna-Rita Papeschi is PhD candidate, and I think at the end of her PhD research at the Bartlett UCL, as well as visiting researcher here at Innsbruck University. So we can maybe briefly introduce the courses. So one of the courses include design 2, 3 and design 4 is tutor. I mainly most of the courses, so I remove my name from here, and by Dr. Marco Poletto, Teresa Greskova and Corbinian Enzinger. Marco, if you would like to do a brief introduction on Terra Farms.
Yeah, this year the topic of Terra Farms looks at the farming industry, but it's very much a kind of broad look that takes the industry as one of the crucial links in terms of our relationship with the urban sphere and our society relation with the urban sphere. And so we departed from quite detailed analysis or research on specific instances in which the farming industry has adopted new technologies in the attempt to improve its efficiency, or in some cases to become more sustainable. And we have tried to assess critically the way these new technologies are applied. Of course, artificial intelligence has a particular interesting impact on this. There are many quite extraordinary applications in terms of improving or increasing the efficiency of the farming industry. So the idea was to move from this analysis and to take that context as a kind of fertile opportunity to discuss urbanization and perhaps the fringes of urbanization in some cases, but also very much what we consider being the center of a critical node of the relationship between cities and the biosphere. And so the projects are very much speculative in nature, but also very much grounded in research. So we will hope to see. I think the morning was very interesting, very exciting. I hope the afternoon will be the same. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Thank you. Teresa, would you like to add something on the seminar aspect connected to this design course?
Thank you. So I have been leading students of the D3 studio through a seminar based on landscape studies, and we have been using different tools, starting with satellite imagery that we have been extracting through different time periods, or say different seasons, and using different visual spectrums in order to, let's say, post-process the drawings and understand the maps in terms of vegetation indexes, water indexes, wetnesses, and solar radiations, fluorescence, etc., and using these information create as a base or data set for creating different networks and flows of energy and mapping how this network also changed over time.
Thank you. Then we have designed 2 second-year studio with Maria Kapsova, Artem Konevskich, and Vadim Smatkin. Maria, if you want to briefly introduce the course.
Thank you, Claudia. Yeah, with the Design Studio 2, we are working in Alpine region, perceiving this landscape as an absolutely synthetic entity. We are looking to the intelligent processes and mechanisms which are happening in the landscape and reading them and decoding them with drone monitoring, 3D scanning, photographing, and processing this information through the complexity of the mathematical drawings in order to propose a new type of interaction with this landscape, which basically evolves the collaboration between the human and non-human agency. Together with Vadim and Artem, we introduced a seminar where they were exploring 2 different techniques, so based on the software of UV Gamma and several techniques in machine learning in order to enhance the computational techniques and imagine the landscape, which is basically driven by the computational forms of intelligence. Yeah, thank you very much, and we'll be looking forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Maria. Last, we will also have 1 group from the theory course. This is supervised by Dr. Ilaria Di Carlo. Unfortunately, for unforeseen circumstances, Ilaria was with us this morning, cannot be with us this afternoon. The theory course is now the 3rd year that we work on a theory course on synthetic landscape. We try to connect philosophical, architectural, design-led theory with the definition of synthetic landscape and with visual reference. So to try and tackle theory also from a visual point of view. And so the student in this case will present their essay and research project at the end of the discussion today. Thank you, Maria and Teresa. I think Maria is still moderating today. Thank you.
Maybe, sorry if I interrupt 1 second. I mean, maybe just wanted to add that for the studio Terra Farms, we tried this formula of, what you may call vertical studio, working 3rd, 4th years together. That means that the projects are somehow finished for some students, but on the other hand, also not for others. So we have I think what is interesting in the comments today is to take that into account, not just let's say make a sort of definitive critique of the project, but also perhaps tease out the elements that could be taken forward either as a 2nd semester for the 3rd years or for the 4th years, maybe as a kind of beginning of a research project leading to their thesis and so on. So I think it's I think that's also the spirit for the course, how it was set up.
Thank you, Marco. We will have a little change of the schedule. Students, we will just for you to note the order. We will start with the D3D4 studio from the project Food from Wood. Then we will go to the liquid formations from D2. Then we proceed with Silkscape from D3D4, and we complete our evening session today with the synthetic landscape presentation of the theory course. And I'm happy to invite Giles and Joseph to present the work Food from Wood.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Okay, so say hello today, and first of all, at the end now of this semester, say thank you for the opportunity also this semester to research about this topic. And to jump in, our project is called Food from Wood, and we want to introduce our site, which is Westphalia. And by looking on the satellite image, we can see many different kinds of land use superficially in the color already, which means like we can see mainly agriculture, wood areas, forest areas, infrastructure like villages, and also some brown areas where we come later to it. But to just make it clear in that way that we have some main land uses here in Europe, which is mainly agriculture and the forest. And by going more deep into forest and agriculture, we want to outpoint that there is a conflict between these two land uses. That means there can be agriculture or there can be forest. So agriculture somehow displaces forest areas and leads to a decreasing of forest areas. So there are multiple reasons for this development. Main reason is the food demand of the humanity, and we also have in the agriculture has shorter harvest intervals, which means like you can harvest the agriculture field 3 times a year compared to a forest, which you can harvest the wood maybe every 40 to 60 years. And to sum it up, the agriculture is in an economically point of view way more attractive for landowners and farmers than the forest. And this leads to, so this also affects the areas and the land, and the agriculture causes a high nitrogen load in the soil over the time, and also a loss of biodiversity. Just one really close example is like the loss of animal habitat, and it's like when we compare it with the forests, we can see that forests, even if they are human-made forests, we can see that they have a better working ecosystem. And also nowadays, in the point of view of climate change, we have a better CO2 storage and a better ecosystem behavior. So what we were thinking in this connection, by analyzing this, we were thinking why we cannot implement the food production into forests, and that we can have kind of both, like to say like we can have a food supply somehow out of forests, and at the same time provide a better system of a better ecosystem protection. And one of the benefits by this point of view, for example, by producing food like mushrooms or insects out of a forest, would be that the wood, or like the wood from the forest itself, does not concur with human food supply. For example, for the production of meat, you need soy, which is also food for human. And if we compare it like with the food source wood, it's not competition of human resources. And also aim to have a recurring of ecological system. And in this further development, we also aim to increase even forest areas to exchange them, like from agricultural areas to forest areas. So by jumping more into this food production out of forest, we found out that there was a Swiss pilot project which researched on developing food out of forest. So what they do is they have as an input wood out of many kinds. Like it can be wood out of the wood industry, or it can be directly dead wood out of the forest. In the second step, you input a mushroom into the into the wood, which makes the first processing of the wood, so said. And after this step, you crash the wood and put it in a box and put beetle larvae in it. These beetle larvae half of a year and develop in this box at the. And after around half of a year, the output is on one side the larvae, which can be which is eatable, and on the other side it's soil. And this production has kind of a circle without waste. The soil is humus, is rich humus, which can be added back to agriculture areas which have a high nitrogen value of the soil and recur existing or harmed agricultural areas. And on the other side, we have food for human with the base of wood. Right on analyzed if it's compatible with other food sources. So we compared the production of insects on an area of 1 square kilometer. And in terms of the output, we can see that the soy has the biggest output, meat the least output, and analyzing other aspects like the water consumption of these productions, we can see like that there is an exponential higher need of water for the beef, for the meat production than all the other mentioned productions. And we also looked on the CO2 emissions of these three productions, and here it points out that the insect production has a way lower CO2 emission than the other productions compared. And our last point we analyzed was out of this product, and here we can also see even the soy had a way higher output in kilograms. We can see that still the insects have the highest value of protein you can get out. So we found out for ourselves that there is a potential for insect food production, and we then wanted to keep on. And yeah, I can go on.
Okay, I'm going back to Siegen, where we were able to see that the forests get harmed by the effects of the climate change a lot. They got thaws and higher temperature, and this development caused a lot of bark beetle spreadings, and results of this are deforestation of affected areas. It's very notable in the last 4 years between 2018 and 2021. As you can see, the green areas are the deforested areas because of the bark beetle. We created a map which contains many information about the type and the height of the vegetation in Siegen, and we were able to figure out where the affected areas and also the different kinds of forests. Also, where the points are a bit bigger and more dense, the forests are a bit older, and especially the type, the location, and the age can affect the forest resistance on diseases and instivation. We zoomed in a bit that you can see a bit better on a 4 kilometer map. Then in Germany, there are not really leftovers of primary leaf forests because the forest turned into tree plantation over the time. So the forest is changing all over, and that's going to happen with the affected deforested areas as well. And also there's a big street network, so most of the areas are reachable. So
Yes, and by summing it up again, like to see the forest also as a farm for food production, we would concur with agricultural areas, and as we said before, also there would then be a potential to make aware the benefit of food production through forest to landowners or farmers, that they also would have the option and possibility to say, okay, either I do have agriculture, or I can also play a plot, and a big potential. And our semester, our project is now focusing on how to coordinate this relation between forest, food production, and agriculture. And we were thinking of inventing, or we take of an working food production with insects and adapt it to a movable food production module, which we can move. And it's we try to define the locations of the food productions, the best potential of the wood sources and the potential of the output areas. And or by developing our system, we take care of many. We also observe by analyzing the agriculture, the forest, and with our system we want to provide the economic use of like for a better forest management.
So as Joseph told, we created a network defining the location of the insect farm by the shortest way of in and output throughout the street network. As you can see here as the pink dots, the beetle affected areas are going to be used as a food source. You're going to see the network in yellow, and we're going to use dead wood for the food production instead of burning it, so we can keep the CO2 into the soil. And the agriculture is the output of our system for the humus soil. Here you can see it in blue, and we're gonna afforest the areas they were cut through trees that are a bit more climate robust. So we made the system throughout the next past years. So the location nearly changed every 5 years, adapted to the change of the bark beetle affected areas. So we can always get the most efficient location for our food production. As you can see, there are less and less food productions because the system forest grows and gets a bit healthier. We also did kind of a forecast for the next 30 years based on the information we had about the past years. So we're going to create a long-term change in the landscape, especially in rising the forest areas. For example, to afforest the cutted areas, and also in decreasing of agriculture with afforestation. So we also searched for another location. It's Almsteig in Austria. They also have a big problem in climate change with the bark beetle. So we wanted to see and to adapt our network to a different location as well, to create a tool or a system that's usable worldwide. The network always captures the best possible location for the insect production. It's always going to look different, cost on the environment. As you can see here, there's less forest, but more agriculture. Yeah, so I think our next step would be to get more parameters in the system and the tool we created to improve the locations and to get like a better dense system. Thank you for listening.
Thank you guys for your presentation. We open for the comments, invite everybody to jump into the discussion.
If that's okay, I have a question really, like a clarification. I think you guys did a great work in try to outline a system of interdependency that is very, very rich. And I'll keep my comments for a second. I really want to get down to the question. What I'm kind of missing, perhaps there's a bit of unclarity in the presentation itself, is like how the system of production of the insect farm is actually specifically promoting the growth of forest. Because you talk about humus and soil, enriched soil, coming as a bioproduct of this production, but then you say this is for agriculture, right? Because I guess it needs to be transported and moved. I mean, can you maybe just expand a little bit on this point, just for clarification?
In one point, we also want to get a bit of the soil back in the forest, not as much as we're going to put it in the agriculture. And on the other hand, we think by getting out the information of the forest to manage the location and to know where we can get like dead food, dead wood, and also which areas could be affected next, we think about kind of managing the forest a bit better so it can grow.
Basically, it's like the changing of making the forest itself as a food producer more attractive to landowners and farmers. This system, because nowadays we think that the existing agriculture has not many options how they can change their business, and in terms of how can we change it to a more sustainable system, even when we have to keep on keeping on the food demand or the food supply for the food demand. And therefore we kind of were thinking, can we not change this paradigm that we need agriculture for the food production? So in offering this new system, let's call it like this, that you can produce food out of a forest, could attract landowners and farmers to say, why not changing my field, for example, back into a forest. Forest is, with this system, an active producer, which it was. The forest is always a producer, but the harvesting was in a long about the harvest of wood, to use the wood in a further way. But now with the production of food out of wood, it needs less wood in a way, but you have a steady production. Like it's also a few for the landowner or the farmer. So this change, like kind of the economic point of view, would increasing of the forest was our thinking. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in. So if I'm to be honest with you, I think that what you're trying to do is far, far too big a brief to achieve in the time width that you have. There are many, many issues that are basically standing out about your project. Now, on the good side, yes, certainly looking at the forest as a source of food is a very, very good area of research. I think what struck me very initially in your presentation was the fact that although the forest has been used as a food source for since the most ancient times, very, very early humans onwards, and in cultures all around the world have used forests as a food source. And it did strike me that you made no reference to that. Now, whether or not that was because you hadn't researched that issue or because you simply didn't have time in your presentation, my advice to you would be, if you're looking to develop this further, that is one of the very first things that you need to look at. You need to look at the cultures that have already, if you like, examined this problem. So that's your base of sort of, the next stage, I would say. The reason being that this is such an ancient locale for food production that all these different cultures and societies that have examined the forest as a food production source have encountered many of the problems that your concept would encounter were it to be developed and go into production, as it were. So that is your first thing. The second thing is that forest systems are extremely complex, and bark beetle infestations no less so. The manifestation of bark beetles is something that is right at the apex of human and ecological systems. The reason being that the way in which bark beetle manifestations tend to manifest in natural forests is quite different to in plantations in monoculture forests. That is obviously mainly because of the fact that if you put a particular species of tree that is very vulnerable to bark beetles all in one place en masse, you're obviously going to have a much worse manifestation typically than if it's a diverse forest. Now that obviously changes, the extent to which that happens changes around the world, but basically the way in which bark beetle infestations are expressed varies depending on the type of forest, whether the extent to which it's been managed by human populations. The other big problem that you have with this is that bark beetle infestations are not only coupled with climate, but they're also coupled with other earth systems, and they are very, very strongly coupled with wildfires. And so when you have bark beetle infestations of the kind that are now becoming more increasing in their volume because of climate change, you have a far higher probability of wildfire. And obviously wildfire probabilities are increasing in all of the areas that you have looked at and many, many temperate forests worldwide. So, as a systemic issue, this is very, very complex. I've only pulled out a couple of the strands to this. And that is a problem that is far bigger and far more complex than you could really hope to achieve in anything at this sort of scale. You would need to be drawing on many, many resources, and you would need to be building a much bigger project to actually investigate that problem in the kind of detail, with a kind of granular sort of level to really kind of iterate your project in a way that would make it, as it were, robust against critique. So that is, I would say, that is a problem for you. But the way that you might address that is if you, obviously, when you're doing a research project, you have to factor in all the things that you haven't had the bandwidth to address. So actually, as you move forward with this project, if you were to acknowledge, as it were, the fact that this is a very, very complex problem, and you can't actually address all of the parameters within and of you know, even the next year. I mean, you know, you would need several years to really develop this with sort of detail. Then that is not going to be an issue in terms of the way that you're going to be critiqued, whereupon you were to present this publicly. So those, I think, are some of the sort of the tricky problems of dealing with complex systems that are at the edge of the natural world and the human world, and you know, it's a very, very messy area. So those are the tough questions. I think the easier things that you could address are the fact what isn't very clear in your project is quite what this production facility is going to look like. And obviously that has a huge bearing on its viability in terms of the fact that, I mean, one of the great big problems with insects is the fact that obviously, you know, if you look to projects like the Biosphere research project over in the States, and now running for many, many years, that was designed as a closed system. The idea being that if you encase a system from the exterior world, if you close it off, then that system would work in a very efficient way. But of course, that's not how the natural world works. In that, what happened is that some ants got in, the ants started to colonize, and then that totally disrupted the system. Now, if you look at that as a case study, the Biosphere project and how that was, you know, what was intended didn't actually manifest. There are a lot of really rich lessons in there that are very, very much applicable to your project. There isn't the time in this critique to go into that in detail, but definitely look at that, because that for you is very, very, very relevant. And I think the other thing you need to look at, you've been very unspecific in terms of, well, it's not clear in the presentation. What is the food source being developed here? What's going to happen to it? I mean, you know, firstly, we need to know the species. We need to know examples of where that species has been used. One of the big markets for something like this could potentially be livestock. Livestock feed insects are used hugely in that area. Are these insects going to go there, or are they going to go to human consumption markets? And if so, where and how? That needs to be iterated, because otherwise it does seem very, very vague. There is a lot of talk about insects being used in sort of future food more frequently and as a protein source, that you really need to get that level of granular detail, even if it's literally just one slide and you've got some images that say, right, okay, these are our anticipated markets. So I think essentially what this project, you've bitten off so very much that you know, you could have had a team of 10 working on this and you still wouldn't have been able to address all these questions. So I think what you've done is good, but I think there are many, many areas that you haven't been able to address because of the immensity of the ambition in the project. So I'd break that down, think really realistically about what questions can you answer, what can't you answer, and then sort of revisit that question of really what's the value that our project is bringing to the table here. And to do that, you're really going to have to think about which area of this big sort of set of questions you're seeking to answer you can really answer with any detail. And I think if you do that, then this is going to be, it's an interesting project. You've got some great aims, but it's very, very vague, and there's a lot of unanswered questions.
I think if it's okay, I will just continue. So I think just to kind of pick up where Melissa left it, I think we also need to say that I think for a team of 2 people, and if I understand, I guess you guys are year 3 or 4, am I wrong?
Combined 3 and 4.
Oh, 3 and 4, okay. I think that, you know, you also managed to develop like some very, very interesting methods and techniques, and this has to be, you know, it is coming to your favor, absolutely. I think some of the drawings are really, really beautiful. You just need, sometimes it felt like looking at the screen, it was very, very difficult to read. And I guess a bit you need to kind of take that on board and probably make a little bit clearer. I mean, there is a point where you kind of say like, well, let's look at a close-up, and then finally something patterns emerge. So, you know, the actual, without going too much in detail, the setup you have to print at one scale and it needs to be different from the one you have at the other scale. But said that, I think in order to frame your thesis with a bit more of strength, you need to go back to your initial analysis and try really to understand, because what you guys are ultimately saying here is that we are finding out that there is a problem, and this problem is actually deforestation. I found those maps about like how much in only 4 years the forests have changed in the area. Absolutely, terrifying. Honestly, I thought it was I saw all these green patches coming through, and I was like, when you say that that's the part that actually like the forest that we have lost. I mean, that was actually absolutely scaring. So perhaps you could even try to, if that's your issue, then you could even try to quantify it and make it even clearer than that. But I mean, I thought that part was really, really interesting, and how you're actually managing to do that just through an analysis of satellite images that are of broader access, right? I think that's really, really good. But then I think that the key is here, how do you, if that's actually your main issue, how do you actually manage to, food consumption, and how your answer to that by changing the system of food and agriculture is exactly answering to that. Because ultimately what you're saying, like, this is happening because of climate change. You're not really demonstrating that that's happening because there is because actually there were permits for landowner to kind of go in and deforestate those areas for agricultural use. So it's a little bit like there are all these kind of loose points and loose connections where ultimately the moment you kind of identify the main issue, and the moment you find an answer for that is kind of very, very loose. Yeah, that's the problem here. Going back, I think, to so you have basically this trend of the deforestation and the answer. The answer to that could be, I mean, that's kind of looking to technology on how to reforestate, if that's the point, right? If that's the main issue. So, I mean, regarding the I think in the same way, I kind of see the same kind of type of decision making in the way you pick up insect consumption, which is clearly a very hot topic and trend and things to look at, and there are a lot of cultural reasons why we might want to do that or not, which were completely not taken into consideration here. And here we go. I mean, it's insect. What we are going to do is we're gonna kind of make insect farming because it's possible in the first. So there are like a bit of somehow, and then why are you actually focusing on that? And as a response to that, to what exactly? It's getting quite loose, if you see what I'm trying to say. Also, I think the technicality of how you actually eventually do an insect farm that comes with its own impact and with the specificity of systems of technologies that allow us to do that. It's completely not visualized in your proposal, and I think it would also kind of add perhaps like a complete different layer of information here. So I think what you need to do if you were bringing this forward is to kind of make some very high level strategic decisions on on what's the best response, what's the most interesting response to the brief and to the challenge that you're putting up for yourself. And I think that challenge is still a little bit loose somehow. You've kind of, it seems to me that you've made like a lot of interesting consideration about possible challenge and possible answer, but still you haven't kind of been able to connect the two of them in a strong statement and a strong strategy.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. I agree with all the comment. I think you have been diligently developing drawing and the brief, but especially in terms of forward here, the issue we have here is a lack of trust in meta languages and in design. So there is a lot of work that goes horizontally in researching about deforestation, and the number of topic and insect, the number of topic becomes huge, but the depth of the discourse remains always the same. And design needs depth, less subject, but more design. And design needs to reflect multiple aspects of language, which are discursive, like the one you have at the beginning is fine, logical understanding of information, but there needs to be metalogical understanding of information. How many times did you eat insect? Did you went to collect them? How do you, what is the key element of your project that you design? And in the moment we interact with it as a user, as a citizen, as an inhabitant of the forest, as a transformative act on us so that we can interact differently with the forest, with insects, etc. Unfortunately, in your project, I'm missing this transformative act. Even the application of artificial intelligence is kind of post-rationalized to make it, perfectly logical tool. And I'm not against logic, as I said many times, but I'm against the overuse of logic, especially when we talk about design. Design is not a pure logical discipline. There needs to be other elements that come in. So for the third year that bring it forward, and for the fourth year that might bring it forward in the future, I suggest to really narrow down the spectrum. Forget about the brief for a good amount of months and concentrate on designing one aspect of it, taking care of the static, of the communication aspect, of how yourself can believe more in the project. Not because I convince you, but because you suddenly see it. The question of introducing, for example, insect as part of nutrition is not trivial. As I also discussed with you in other occasion, maybe in the midterm, I don't remember, I've been trying to eat insect many times. It's not a concept that culinary and culturally, it's so easy to tackle. So the question is, if you like to introduce it, you need to believe that is a possibility. Otherwise, we would not impose to others to do it, or we would not even start to make all this effort. Okay, so you need to try and establish as a designer a deeper level of connection with some of the elements you design, by looking at them at the material level, at the digital level, by allowing them to express, to tell you something. It's not only you to try to organize reality, it's a mutual kind of exchange. As we discussed before, with the tutor, with the design, it's a conversation. It's not a way of controlling, it's a conversation. That is the type of trigger, although the project has got very beautiful drawing and dual technique, that for me is the trigger that is still missing in this project and on which you need to reflect for your next step. Thank you, and thanks for the comments so far.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys. We would need to move on, and I invite the D2 group of students to present project Liquid Rock Formations by Felix, Jordi, and Oscar.
Hi, that's our group. We will just get started. I think now I should be already. Great. So let's talk about liquid rocks. As a unique ecosystem, the Alps are the home to very different kind of inhabitants. We have on one side eagles that are flying on altitudes up to 20,000 feet, but also even marine animals in the turquoise blue lakes. Let's look at the region of Obernberger See to find out more. Located basically in the middle of the Alps, we encounter many facets there in a region that is just about 6 square kilometers. The satellite imagery already gives us a good overview about the site, and we can already see some of the facets that are interesting over there, or that interested us. And here's Oscar now to tell you more about it.
Yes. in order to understand our area and to see the terrain and its height differences better, we made a depth map of the top view. And we also applied different layers which show the orientation of the slope of the mountain and the visualization of the gradients. And there's a close relation between those aspects. The terrain has also a big impact on the absorption of the solar radiation. And as you can see on the left side, there's a huge contrast between the hottest day and the coldest day of the year, which affects the snow and ice freezing and melting times. This artificial landscape hasn't changed on a large scale since 1970. So already back then it was controlled and was held in a constant state. The water has also a big impact on our site. It is moving constantly, especially in the springtime when the snow is melting. And therefore we did a water flow simulation to see how the mountain and the rocks can be shaped by the water.
All right, now let's look at the actual collected data. So together with the other groups from Design Studio 2, we went there in autumn and took all different kinds of images and really like let the area like suck it in and see it from being there. And even the way to the area was interesting because we were going higher and higher with a small hike, so we could really also have like non-digital information and data gathered over there. But still the main goal was to collect as many details and details and details as we could to later on analyze them and work with them. So even there, we thought that the most interesting part was how it evolves and all the different things that we can find there. So we decided to take a gigapixel photograph. That's basically just a fancy word for a picture that has a very, very high resolution. This one is made out of 208 single images and then stitched together and projected in a way that we can zoom in basically as much as we want and slice the image to have all the detail in one place.
To use the high pixel density of our gigapixel photo to our advantage, we sliced the image again and took a close look on all the details our site has to offer. From top to bottom, there's a difference of almost 1,000 vertical meters, and the scene is divided by the tree line at around 2,000 meters. Above it, it is a harsh and very steep environment, which consists of almost only rocks, followed by trees in the lower regions. Down low, the landscape's gradient is getting flatter until it reaches the lake. The lake, more precisely the water, is also the connecting factor between our materials. Rock is very affected by water, and because of that, we mostly concentrated on this material. We analyzed the small pictures even further, and by creating depth maps and we were able to underline the different structure and moreover apply water flow simulation and erosion simulation. On the big picture, after some iterations, erosion is very visible and formed a visually appealing structure. Now that we understand the rock's structure and erosion process, we are ready for the next step. To further work with our rock slices, we needed to enlarge our data set. Luckily, StyleGun did a great job and created a lot of new rock formations based on the slice images we took from our original picture. On the first video, we just used a single square image, but later on the next one, we repeated the patterns to have it even larger. Even if it's not the purpose of style gun, it almost looks like landscapes merging into another. The advantage, one slide back, please. The advantage of having a huge dataset is that we were able to make a point cloud, which can be easily modified and reshaped. By voxelizing the point cloud, we managed to design a structure which is combining our main materials, liquid and rock. On the wireframe drawing in the middle, the inside is clearly visible. The pictured small channels could be formed by water over time, but were fully controlled by us. To scale it up, we applied the rock material to one of our generated landscapes and created a new landscape which has structure-wise a similarity to our site at the Obernberger See.
For now, let's turn back to our site at Obernberger See and look at the landscape and what we can do more with it. So here's again the landscape, like the simulated, but the real one without redesigning it. And what fascinated was, or what we thought was, that if every place where water has a huge impact, for example, you can see it on the best, the higher you get on top of the mountain here on the upper left part of the image, the higher the impact of the water is, the deeper are the gaps. So water basically removes material. And we had this idea, like designing not by destroying or by removing things, but instead turn this around and design by adding things. So in order to accomplish that, first we focused on the upper part where the water has the highest impact on the real landscape and looked at on ways how we could reshape it. Until now, we're not adding anything, we're just reshaping and looking at it. But later on, we said we want to focus more on the whole site and how the whole site behaves together. And also on the lower images, you can see then the reshaping of the whole site. After trying different sources as a source file, we decided that the best file to work with was the one with the DEM file, where you could see the highest contrast in between places with a huge impact of water and places with lower impact. So the larger image on the left side, made with VV gamma, we basically extruded it and created a file that is now able to be printed in 3D. But we wanted to have the flow of the water also in our process and how the water like really behaves. And the best thing to do it is with using actual water. So in order to accomplish that, we created 7 layers out of our file. Each layer represents a different altitude. And then we decided to move further on with a new technique called a Camigram. This technique was used in the 50 years ago or so in the darkroom, especially when with photography, with darkroom and analog photography were really on their peak. And we thought we could borrow some ideas from back then. The interesting part is that we use a chemical called natrium triosulfate, which is dissolved in water. So it basically behaves the same way as water does. And when we put droplets of this liquid on top of photographic paper, and we develop the paper later on, we can see that the chemical destroys the light sensitive area on the paper. And this results in basically the places where the water or the liquid hits the paper stay white, the rest turn black. Okay, instead of spraying some drops or liquid on a piece of paper, we still need to have control. And now this is the point where the 3D printer comes back in and the file that I showed you earlier on. So we printed basically each layer on a different set of paper, about 30 centimeters wide. And after darkening up the lab in our university, these are the results we got out. So basically, as we can see, we have a very contrasty and abstract image, and it's basically pure white where the liquid hit the paper and pure black on the untouched surfaces. Now let's look at the scans of the 3D of the chemigrams. And the interesting part is that we have now like small two-dimensional metaballs, or like shadows of metaballs. And when we conduct an edge detection, we already can see nice qualities that remind maybe a little bit of an underwater landscape. And wouldn't it be interesting to overlay them with the reshaped landscape that we did earlier, and found out that we're now talking about a completely different site. So we are moved very far away from the original landscape at Obernberger See, but still some areas, especially on the more abstract VV gamma images, fit well and nicely together. But now let's bring back our 3 dimensions with the stacking them like a sandwich, all the layers on top of each other, the way we just sliced the file for 3D printing. Basically, we can think as the edge detection is like the contour lines at different altitudes. And using a metaball algorithm, we were able to combine all these shapes and create basically a new kind of landscape similar to the one that Felix showed you, but with the difference that this one is not being created by destroying or removing material, but the other way around. It's created by adding material and new things. And we think it's very interesting how these two new landscapes that are completely different, but so they have the same source and with a completely different way of making them, have similarities, but also differences. Yeah, that's about our presentation.
Thank you very much, guys, for the dive through your beautiful work. We open for the comments. I invite everybody to jump into the discussion.
I'll kick off. Extremely impressive. I was particularly impressed by the fact that your research is very comprehensive in the techniques it's used. I especially liked your fusion of computerized digital, if you like, state of the art, with traditional methodologies. You had the ocular visit. I felt that the what that brought to this project, your high resolution image, and just you clearly had a sense of that landscape. And I that very much felt infused in the work, which I think is one of the key things that has kind of led you to where you are. The sort of using the analog photography technique, I thought was incredibly original. I think the concept that you're working with is highly original. I think that its significance is, if you like, beyond landscape, the urbanism. I think that this is very interesting architecturally, period. I mean, this concept could be applied at all sorts of different levels in design. So this, to me, speaks to a project that has a lot of potential to be developed further. And if you're not already thinking of doing it, I would very strongly recommend to you to think about taking this to that next level, to actually thinking about pitching for funding, for taking this to PhD level and beyond, because this really is a rich subject area. I felt there was a great literacy to your research. It was very, very well organized. I very much understood what you were trying to do. The fact that at the end of it, you hadn't got, as it were, a sort of, clear picture of quite what this would achieve in terms of how the landscape would look, that's by the by, because what you're actually developing here is a genuine, a sort of system of, this is a process and a genuine, genuinely systemic process that is very much drawn and inspired from the landscape. So, I really don't have any critique to sort of bring to this, other than the fact I think you've done an incredibly good job, and I find it all very compelling, and I really hope that you continue and you push this forward, because I think some very exciting things could come from it.
Thank you.
Right. An absolutely stunning project. I mean, there are some absolutely stunning visuals in what you have presented here today. And I think that, considering that you're a second year, I'm actually having goosebumps. They are really, really beautiful. So first of all, let me say that the aesthetic level of your production is absolutely outstanding, at least for me. So I just echo what Melissa says. And I think I saw this project back in the midterm, if I'm not mistaken. And I think the level of, the step forwards that you have made since I saw the project in the midterms to what you have today, it's absolutely outstanding. But let me try to get a little bit more into why I think all this, beside obviously the fact that the imagery is really fascinating and beautiful. I think what this project is about is really about methods. So if I'm thinking this more in a sort of a classic way, what would I expect you to argue for in this presentation, then maybe there are some lack. Maybe there is a bit of lack there. I would have argued for you I would have expected you to argue to find a sort of solution to something, right? So to be a bit more optimized. But what you're really doing here is to look at designing methods in a very, very broad sense. And I think the very first thing that I like with this project is how you kind of question the point of view. So how you go from this sort of very kind of satellite point of view, right? That is somehow is the hyperhuman, because we made the satellites, and we are the only species on this in the ecosphere that is actually able to see that type of imagery all in one go. And it's kind of, it's very, very interesting if you think about it in that way. But then you kind of confront it immediately with this perspective of the world, which is sectional and immersive. And I think the fact that you are reflecting upon both of these point of view, it's very crucial and critical. And obviously all of this work that you've done on the view of the mountain, right? And the moment that you start to think about the perspective of one point, that could be the multitude, right? So how do you, the point of view, basically the perspective upon our world, I think that's a very interesting point to speculate on. And I think, if you are bringing this forward, that's exactly the point that needs to be further looked at. I mean, why exactly the point? Why not a perspective? What it would be if it's a perspective? What if it's a section? What type of section? How do I make that section? And so on, right? There are a lot of decision making in this and things that could be argued upon. I think that when you kind of look at it from a satellite point of view, we tend to think that there is, an absolute plane of cut that we cut that is above the atmosphere, and that's what we see below. But obviously, this can change. So I would say that space of possibilities that reflect in a point, the point of view and the point of view of perception and the way we represent this would be a very, very interesting area to keep looking into, that you have started to open it, even more than, the gun and so on, that I think it's already very innovative that you use the gun, on the vertical part, but on the vertical imagery. But how, I think it's a very interesting area of research, and I think that is still kind of, why the problem, the more general problem that we see is exactly what you're looking at now. That is like, how do we pass from something that is a 2D image into like a three-dimensional understanding of it? If you've done it by starting to section through this mass, yeah, but I think there are many ways of doing it. And I think that's beautiful that you've tapped into this specific type of research, particularly for this stage of your studies. I mean, it's just outstanding. And you can kind of keep reflecting upon exactly how do we construct this description of space that is, that, you know, the idea of the layering is one. You talk about voxel, which are a very specific definition of space and data within space. So I think there's a lot to conceptualize about it. I'll stop here, but it's a very, very, very well done, beautiful work. Yeah.
I was trying to reflect upon, maybe like provoke you a little bit, because obviously you've been complimented, and rightly so. But like there is the idea of beauty, you know, that is recurrent, of course, been mentioned several times. But still, it's not clear to me what is the value of beauty to you. Like, I mean, basically, you spent the past 3 months trying to produce beautiful things, I guess, right? Like to try to make, you know, a workflow that reads nature and natural patterns in a sense and transposes them into artifacts of different kind, which they're not necessarily only referencing back to that model of nature, but create their own nature or their own aesthetic, or, you know, which some people may call organic because that's how they look, but they are completely artificial and abstract in a sense, right? So the question is, how do you feel about all this process, and what is the value of the beauty that you have created with your algorithms to you?
Oh, I'm still not muted. Okay. Yeah, it's actually a good question. It's actually hard to say, because with nature, like beauty just like happens, and maybe some parts are beautiful. I don't know if you have been to Iceland or some places like this, it's just absolutely stunning, but the forces actually are even the same in some ugly place as well. And it was just to get like kind of a control and see what we can do controlling those forces and inverting them.
I think there is something more that your tutor didn't want to tell you. There is something more in the expression of pattern. Of course, here we're talking about beauty and aesthetic, but it's a very specific aesthetic. There are, in human culture, thousands, if not millions, other aesthetics. This specific aesthetic connect also to information. I don't know if you had the chance to read the article where we quoted the fact that beauty is a measure of ecological intelligence in many systems, biological and artificial. So this is a specific type of aesthetic, and you've been, of course, you're a second year, you're kind of being challenged there and embrace it with a lot of energy. But what Marco, I think, is trying to make you reflect upon is what is the value of this aesthetic. And intrinsic in the method is the fact that pattern, specifically this work with pattern and visual languages, create a correlation between experience of beauty and aesthetic value with informational process, which are not down to the single number, but are more down to the tendency, the behavior, okay? How as human and through non-human form of machine, can we start to read this pattern and therefore develop a different knowledge of the world that surrounds us, almost similar to when you observe the cloud that you make more or less reasonable prediction of when it rains or not, right? You watch nowadays we watch the applet on the phone, right? But my grandmother used to watch the cloud, right? So these are patterns. depending from the density, the darkness, but are also information, you know, humidity and etc. So the cloud are information, but are pattern, and they are environment. So how can we reconnect to pre-industrial habit of, you know, rigid pattern that human had, to connect to non-human form of intelligence, but through technology and design? Okay, how do we transform ourselves as human to be able to judge the environment we deal with, and eventually designing by developing a language made of multiple type of patterns, some of which are visual and of the kind you've been working with. But there is a question of being able to work with an aesthetic, and then there is another level of being aware of the effect and the implication and the context in which this aesthetic has been developed. So maybe that's where Marco was trying to provoke you or lead you. Are you aware of the context where, and the consequence that the deployment of this aesthetic can have in architecture and landscape design?
I think maybe also what I wanted to highlight is that our educational system, I think, has trained us to argue for the kind of things we do in rational terms, and we find it very easy actually to say, oh, you know, this is like this because it is smoother and so the water flows better, and then this is like that because, you know, it's exposed better to the wind, blah blah blah. You know, on the other hand, I found that it is difficult to discuss or argue for patterns from the point of view of their beauty, and essentially create arguments, create discourses around that, or around the reading of these patterns. And I think that is actually a process that, like Claudia was referring to. You know, for some pre-industrial societies, for example, it was recurrent as a matter of trying to make sense of the world around them, maybe like to make predictions about what will happen in terms of weather or in terms of other elements. And of course, this would be connected to a whole you know, kind of mystical level, let's say, of interpretation of phenomena that were not possible to explain with the rational know-how of the time. And I think that there is a certain value for me today in trying to recuperate that ability, of course, without necessarily abandoning the kind of technological apparatus that we have developed and the possibilities that offers, like, for example, in terms of satellite monitoring and so on and so forth. But in terms of the interpretation of the huge amount of data, for example, that we are inundated with, right? And you know, so the question is that if you look around, you will find out that in most cases, data that we have are interpreted in very reductionist terms. Because people struggle enormously in constructing narratives that are based on huge amount of data without, you know, somehow, for example, find the average, or without, you know, find the constant optimal value within them, right? And so I think for me, there is a value in what you guys have been doing that is kind of beyond that, and it's really in kind of creating a language of patterns, which is still grounded in data, still grounded into science in a certain extent, but it's also completely autonomous from it. And I would encourage you to try to find a zone of a narrative where you feel comfortable, that operates exclusively at the level of the interpretation and the reading of this data. You clearly know these patterns, sorry. You clearly have a kind of feel for it, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to create such images. You clearly know what resonates to you or not, and are able to take decisions upon it. But you're not arguing for these decisions or for these responses, intuitive responses, you're not arguing for it. I think you still look completely uncomfortable in kind of making an argument around that, no? And I think it would be a really, really interesting exercise, especially at the level where you are, the freedom you are granted still, before, kind of, higher level examiners come in and ask, hi, how does that stand up and whatever. To really make to really create a whole language, a whole attitude around that, so that you can be really strong into arguing for these patterns without recurring to external factors or rational justifications for them, but rather trying to understand and articulate the value that is inherent in the pattern as a measure of ecological intelligence, as Claudia is saying, as a measure of some principle, behavior, logic that you are touching upon, but it is not purely understandable in rational terms or in reductionist terms. And this is, for me, is a very, very important step and contribution that you can make, and that now you are very well equipped to keep exploring. And I think that's, obviously you need to say a big thank you to your tutors, because clearly it's a huge amount of work they have done with you. But, essentially now it's up to you. I mean, they can't do more. They can't, they can't do it for you. So now they have equipped you with the best possible tools for that we have. And now it's about you guys being bold and unapologetic and just, follow that kind of feelings that you have, abilities that you have, and just take it to the next level.
I can just add to that. I do think there is more to your work than patterns. Whilst I was watching your presentation, the scientist in me was looking at this and thinking, yes, these are very astute observations. They're very correct in their understanding of geological processes. I was especially impressed by the analysis that you did on the impact of water, basically, sort of the matter that at the top end of the mountain, the higher ranges, if you like, the carving of the landscape, was more noticeable than lower down the slopes. But actually, this was speaking to the designer in me, in that as you were describing your research, I was thinking, oh goodness, how would that be used? How would that be applied at the level of the building, at the level of furniture, at all sorts of different scales? My mind was sort of wondering, what's the scalability of these processes? So I think inherently what it spoke to me, as well as obviously the patterns, is the fact that essentially this is a production of a method of production. This is a production process. And that's where this is extremely original. And it is one of the areas of the natural world that has not yet really been applied to design as a whole discipline. So I think about that, and also bear in mind, yes, you don't actually have to produce anything physical. You don't actually have to design a house or, a landscape, a city or what have you, to, if you like, bring value to what you're doing, because it is about developing processes. So you could, in effect, display this project. I can see this, your work being displayed in a biennale, in a gallery, where you're literally just iterating or showing the processes and the patterns. But equally, I can see this developing into a collection of things where you're actually working with other designers, where you're working with others to see how they apply the concepts that you're developing. So I just think about that. I think there are different levels of value in what you're doing, but the concept is highly original. And so, yeah. I mean, I second everything everyone else has said, but I do think that, this is a production process as well as a pattern.
Thank you so much.
Obviously, one question for me would be, is a natural formation by definition beautiful, or is a natural formation by definition the highest possible beauty, or can you intervene in it and make it better? And what kind of intervention would that be? Or are there examples where human intervention have actually improved the beauty of nature, and to what extent that can be done intentionally, or to what extent that happened naturally, and so on and so forth. And I think that, you know, again, I totally agree with Melissa that there's many layers in this, but I think there is a level there that is so intriguing, and that I think it would be just really great to hear you guys taking some risks in kind of discussing it, exposing it, you know, bringing it to the forefront, and, you know, maybe even making claims that you're not 100% sure yet, but then you can see, you know, then you see the reactions of people to these claims, and it becomes exciting.
A beautiful discussion. Thank you so much for the comments. Beautiful presentation. Well, of course, from my side and from the side of the team of Vadim and Artem, I think it's a great pleasure to see the outcome, to see the work that we have done as a team. And I think that behind this maybe verbal construction, you have been driven by the very intuitive language throughout the whole process. And the presentation is also, I think, like you're driving us through the beautiful tree by constructing not only verbal explorations, but really like diving us through the aesthetical language. So it's time to finish this presentation. So I would need to cut and invite next group to present. Thanks again, everybody. I invite group D3 from the studio D3, D4, Silkscapes, right, by Verena and Fatma.
Hello. So we want to present you Silk Escape, escaping a toxic cycle of conventional silk farming and implementing a new ecological system of silk production and planting mulberry trees. Silk fabric have its origin in Asia, specifically in China. Do you still hear me? Sorry, I think
we hear you very well.
Okay.
And presentation.
Yeah, most specifically in China, where still most of the silk farming is taking place, with the Silk Road in the Middle Ages becoming an important trading route. The silkworms and mulberry trees, which is the only food a silkworm would eat, were finding the way to Europe, mostly settling down in Italy. The production was only essential until Industrial Revolution, where silk lost its efficiency in manufacturing and Asia gained back, dominating the market of silk production and export, while Europe still is a big consumer of the silk product. And with China and India being the biggest producers and exporters, the downside of high labor, low technological improvement, animal cruelty, and ecological consequences like chemical fertilizers or deforestation come with it. So we look for a way to bring back silk industry to Europe, where high consumption is of, where there is a high consumption of silk products, but only a small amount of farms still producing it.
While the silkworm doesn't live in wild nature anymore and is completely relying on humans, it can live and spin silk in any space with room temperature. The mulberry tree, on the other hand, needs a little more support for growth. The slide before. But first, we want to give a small introduction into the life cycle of a silkworm. Silk is produced by the spit of the silkworm, with which is spins a cocoon. After the cocoon stage, the move hatches after 3 to 4 days. Shortly after laying 30 to 500 eggs, the female moth dies and the cycle begins again. In the traditional silk industry, the silk is harvested for human consumption as soon as the cocoons are ready by killing the insect in boiling water. It takes about 5,000 silkworms to produce 1 kilo of silk. There are 3 main branches of sericulture. The first one is the moriculture, which is the mulberry cultivation. Then the silkworm rearing, which includes from egg to larval and cocoon spinning stage. And the last branch is the reeling and weaving of the silk. The silk farm concept covers different dimensions, from the landscape scale to silkworms. All processes needed for silk production are included in the flexible system of planting trees, rearing the worms, producing the fiber, and distributing the final product. To understand better the process during the rearing, we got our own worms and observed their behavior and needs. We made some measurements to follow their growth over time as we exposed them to different conditions to see how they would react. During the spinning process, we monitored their behavior in different environments. The silkworm would always try to find a corner to spin. It builds different layers in the structure, from a substructure to a scaffold for the cocoon by spinning small amount of the silk to spinning a really dense network of silk for the cocoon. During a motion tracking experiment, we tracked the time and movement of the worms and traveled to a spot where mulberry chow has been placed. During further development of the motion tracking, we were able to follow 2 silkworms spinning their primary structure for their cocoon. Generally, the silkworm would first spin a wild scaffold of silk and then gradually reduce the spinning region to the cocoon. Before cocoon spinning starts, the silkworm purges its gut, which is an essential step before being able to go into metamorphosis. The silkworm lab monitors the development of the larvae with special focus on their health. The silkworm is very fragile and can quickly die from different disease and infect other worms. In conventional silk farming, the cocoon is being boiled until the larva dies and inside to get a nicer result of a continuous silk thread. While letting the worm end its metamorphosis and developing to a moth is actually more efficient because one moth can lay up to 500 eggs.
Right. And after our research and analysis of silkworms, we had gathered enough information to design a suitable landscape for a silkworm. First, we have to be aware of the fact that the fashion industry and therefore silk industry is causing a lot of environmental pollution, and most of the production is not suitable at all. And with Asia being the biggest producer of silk, while Europe is one of the biggest importer, we wanted to change this flow by locating our farm in Europe, more specifically in Austria. And the main reason that the biggest silk fabrics are in Asia is the climate, which is very suitable for the mulberry trees there. The mulberry tree needs sandy soils and a pH value of 5.5 to 6.5 and hardiness zones 4 to 9 for optimal growth. When we have a look into the hardiness zones across Europe, we can see that due to climate change, it will get a lot warmer, and therefore the hardiness zones get shifted from zones 5 to 6 to zones 6 to 8 in Austria, and therefore preserve a more suitable climate for the mulberry trees. We analyzed an area of 100 to 100 kilometers in Tyrol over the year of 2021 for every season, winter, spring, summer, and autumn. And we tried to find the perfect location for our mulberry plantations to grow, and then therefore analyzed the sites to different parameters. We took the infrared radiation, which shows the photosynthetically active vegetation. and also the vegetation index, which is showing, similar to the infrared filter, the active vegetation, but is filtering it for different parameters and shows it if the vegetation is healthy or not. So here the golden areas are the most healthy vegetation. And yeah, we can see it spreading a lot more in summer, obviously. The water index is showing the wetness and moisture of the soil, which we then extracted to compare the different areas in winter, spring, summer, and autumn to make sure to get the most dense area. And for analyzing the site more specifically, we took summer season and visualized the most important parts for planting the trees. And here you can see the locations of the villages and the NDVI and wetness index. And then we connected the points we got from solar radiation, so the areas with the most sunlight, and the points from a slope radiation, because we are in the Alps and need to make sure that the ground is as flat as possible, and connect them to a network, and furthermore to a shortest walk in between. And so our site has the scale of 100 to 100 kilometers. We had to develop the network even further to get the realistic distances between the points. So we connected the closest points of the wetness index to our existing path, and furthermore, another layer of the highest solar radiation and the flat areas. And together with the intelligence of the silkworms spinning their cocoons and the developed logic to get the most suitable locations for the trees, we wanted to find a way to combine both in our design, and yeah, made some digitalizations of the cocoon structures. And the cocoon has its widely woven structure, and then the more dense parts where the cocoon is. And we then made some trainings to show this structure and the scale of the landscape to get a better estimation of how to work with the silk structure. We then decided to keep it on a smaller scale to be able to use it for our Terra farm and to make the connection to the new infrastructure we created. So yeah, here we just took small scale from the infrastructure before, and yeah, we can imagine to work further on the algorithm of the shortest walk while implementing the silk structure, and therefore create a new intelligence of bringing the silk farming back to Europe. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We welcome everybody for a discussion.
I'll just kick off by saying I think that your research was very coherent. You clearly established all the parameters that you needed to. You layered your research very well. I think really all the key metrics in terms of establishing where the mulberry plantations would be were very well addressed. There were a few things that weren't completely clear to me. I didn't quite understand how you would use all of this information that you had assimilated and processed to actually, you know, it's not clear to me what the farms would look like. It's not particularly clear to me how they would relate to the landscape, other than the fact that they accommodate of the many different metrics of the landscape throughout the seasons. I thought diagrammatically, very, very beautiful work. And yeah, I mean, generally, I think that you're on the right track, but I think you need to put a bit more work into establishing really what the link between the data and the flows are, and the final iteration of the silk farm itself. But certainly as a problem, it is a critical problem, and I was especially impressed by the fact that you've looked at how the climate would affect the temperature zones, and where where would be suitable for mulberry plantations. That was very much an incisive aspect of your work that really spoke to the depth of research that you've done. So generally speaking, I think a good project, but I think there needs to be more clarity and more work put into establishing really what's the output of this, other than getting a much clearer idea of where mulberry plantation or silk farms might be, you know, over the coming years, and why?
Yeah, I mean, if that's okay, I will continue on this. I think Melissa, thank you. I completely agree with you. And I was exactly thinking how, you know, you could improve. It seems like a very straightforward position, right? You guys identify a very strong issue, and you're trying to hack into them by localizing with a very intelligent and smart strategy this idea of the production of silk. But somehow I think that the you know, what could be improved is really like at the beginning of your thesis, and that would completely kind of unravel like a new point of view that could potentially drive you through to a complete different level, which is basically like you start from the assumption that we need to disrupt the silk production. But my question is actually why, and how does this actually connect beyond like the fact that the mulberry tree can grow here in Austria with the actual kind of production of, I don't know, other fabric or manufacturing of the area, and how do people would, I mean, why would Austria be interested in actually producing silk? I mean, I'm sure there is a fantastic reason for that, but I think that unraveling and reflecting on exactly this would eventually kind of bring you to a completely different resolution in your proposal. Because, I mean, potentially you could kind of hack into an existing manufacturing system, strategies, and the system of, you know, existing kind of, I don't know, warehouses and the system of production of perhaps something else. I mean, what's a little bit unclear is like beyond the actual kind of silk, what happens and what do you need in order to actually develop further these items, no? I mean, silk fabric and so on, and if it's only fabric, or maybe there are other uses for it. So I actually don't know, but I think it's exactly in here that you can come up with a urban scale proposal that could be really radical, and maybe kind of imagine a different urban infrastructure or urban, you know, type of proposal that, you know, it hybridizes what's on in the area, and come up with an architectural construct that is highly innovative, but you haven't, you know, even touched that surface yet. So somehow my feeling is that you have identified an interesting topic, but, you know, potentially you could really grow out of this a very interesting thesis as well if you are at continuing it. But you need to kind of readdress really the starting points of this project.
I think what is interesting here is that you are engaging with silk at two levels. Of course, on one side it's a material and it's a production process, and you know, obviously it's a natural fiber that has incredible properties and qualities, and therefore also value. On the other hand, you are engaging with, shall we say, the intelligence of the worms as a creature, and in the way they spin their silk thread, and how that relates with the kind of surrounding space. And I think you have developed a pretty interesting technique for not only, you know, growing worms, but also tracking their behavior and sort of scanning the logic of the web. Now, how these two realms, let's say the material system on one side and the intelligence, you know, how do they eventually inform each other, if at all? It probably is where the project struggles a bit, or at least you know, it didn't really came across so clearly in this presentation. I think you know, with the work, maybe you want to go back a couple of slides. There is this image where you start, yeah, maybe these ones, where you start exploring the application of artificial intelligence algorithms. And I think this image seems to suggest that you believe it's possible to deploy the intelligence or the logic of the way these creatures actually spin, organize their networks to inform this new kind of productive factory landscape. And so I think that's where perhaps these two realms can begin to converge, and also can begin to suggest scenarios where the production of silk moves away from industrialization and begins to engage with a new paradigm, much closer to the landscape, but again not necessarily what it was in the age before industrialization, and also capable of competing with let's say industry that is now leading the market in Asia. So I think that is the kind of node that in my mind needs to be developed further to essentially clarify how these two levels of the research, which I think in and of themselves are interesting and valuable. They could also be taken separately if you want, and still they will have enough kind of value. But I think that really the novelty of what you bring forward, especially with this part of the work, it's the possibility for a new forms of silk production that perhaps is more connected with the logics of the way these creatures actually spin the silk itself, and the kind of structure that they naturally create, which obviously are lost at the moment. They are lost not just as a kind of a logic system, intelligence system, but they're also lost in terms of material properties, material system itself, because essentially the process to produce silk fabric or textiles completely discards these kind of logics. It just treats silkworms as generic production machines and grow them into humongous quantities with actually high rate of death, but because they are so easily to farm in humongous quality, it doesn't matter. So I think that there is a really fundamental point that you're trying to make, and you've done a really wonderful research at that level, but I don't think you're kind of driving home enough conclusions or potential repercussions of that research that to justify its value in that sense. So I think I invite you to look into that, because that's what I think there is a potential.
I'd just add, actually, I mean, as I was thinking about your project a little more, it struck me that sometimes when you're working on a project and if you're like struggling a little bit with your own direction and you're thinking to yourself, well, quite how am I going to push this forward? It can be actually, really useful to look at the work of others that have obviously looked at this problem. And obviously one of the primary projects in this space of looking at, silkworms in the architectural context would be Neri Oxman's Silk Dome, where she let the silkworms loose to do their thing. Now that's a project that's obviously been around quite a few years now. So it's a project that's attracted both applause and critique. And thinking about, that project is very interesting in that obviously within and of that project, the silkworms are part of the production process of the architecture. It's taking it to that scale. But of course, the particular kind of architecture is very limited in its application, because obviously it's quite a flimsy structure. But maybe were you to sort of take a step back, I mean, yes, the fashion industry is a major consumer of silk. But if you were to think about that project, that industry, you might think, well, what would happen if the silkworms were actually the product, the agent of production, in the same way that Neri Oxman's were with her dome, for a garment. What would that look like if they were sort of, if you like, let loose to construct the dress? What would be the limitations? What would be the virtues? And then actually thinking about it again at the architectural scale, and then factoring in all the sort of possibles that maybe, well, a project like Oxman's didn't account for. So for example, if you would think about genetically engineering silkworms, could you actually create a silk that is stronger, more like that of a spider silk, that actually has that structural robustness? Starting to ask questions that may not actually they might not be answerable, and they might not even be possible, but really start to expand your imagination as to, you know, and really push the limits, and don't be scared to sort of ask what might even seem ridiculous questions about, you know, how you could actually reinvent this process. Because you know, silkworms, it again, you know, there's something ancient about this. We've been working, you know, humanity's been harvesting silk from worms for thousands of years, and we're at this really interesting juncture now where we can start to explore how we do that, how we reinvent that whole process. So it's an extremely exciting space. I think that, you know, actually getting to the point where you are in terms of researching all the sort of foundational issues has, you know, that's given you a strong base. But you've yet to sort of reach that point of actually putting something on the table that really sort of challenges the sort of received wisdom about what the limitations of working with silkworms are. So I think if you start to push yourself to look at those questions and really sort of just really brainstorm, just sort of throw everything that you can think of into the situation. Don't sort of be limited in how you approach this, and then come away from that, then reevaluate the process, because I think you could actually create something incredibly special and, you know, inspiring from this, but you're yet to sort of make that leap. So have a think about that, and you know, as I said, look at other people's projects and critique them yourself, and ask the questions that you think that they could or they should have answered that they didn't, and that you might.
I think it's also important to, you know, contextualize that in the collaboration between the third and the fourth year. I think that's also something that I'm quite intrigued about, because, you know, one side, the third year, have another semester to actually perhaps push this to a much more actualized conclusion in terms of a design project, right? And on the other hand, I think a diploma student has the chance here to begin to pull out a true research topic that can be brought at thesis level, and you know, really kind of become a fundamental piece of work and research that you know sets you up for that. So I think for me it's really important that you also listen to the feedback and kind of try to contextualize it, you know, in your own way. Hopefully maintaining this collaboration active. I think something that we tried this year with this vertical system is really to also create collaborations between students that are at different level, and then also have different rhythms in their research, but maybe because of that they can naturally explore the same topic in a different way, from different perspective, and sort of inform each other, right? So I think that's I think you have a great starting point in that sense. But yeah, definitely it's a good moment to reflect upon what, you know, for each of you this becomes or can become.
Thank you very much for the discussion. Should we move on? We have one more presentation of the Synthetic Landscape Speculations and Definitions course by Josephine, Amy, and Stephanie.
Yes.
I invite you.
Yes.
And
I'm sure you're really excited because it's not been a long day.
That has been a great, pleasant day. So, but we are really looking forward to see your work.
Oops.
And
oh, 1 second.
We're
actually very excited. It's World Wetland Day today, so just strange coincidence. Just a moment, Josie is sharing the screen.
It was open actually. Sorry.
I will share again. All right. Go full screen, please.
Okay, so hi again. We're still Amy, Josie, and Steffi. And the question of what comprises a synthetic landscape is kind of at the forefront of our research, or was this semester, which means that we also have to understand the notion of the Anthropocene and our human impact on our planet as well. So hyperobjects, for example, are entities of such vast temporal and spatial dimensions that they defeat traditional ideas about what a thing is in the first place. And what you can see here, this plastic agglomerate serves as an example of a hyperobject. So it is a rock naturally formed from merged synthetic material, and also a testimony of our interference with the planet. And some scientists have proposed that our time should be formally recognized as the beginning of this new epoch of geological time, as you know, based on the argument that humans have changed the Earth system significantly. However,
so as we've heard during the course of the semester, it is not always about us, but about understanding that everything is interconnected in what Timothy Morton defined as the mesh. Interconnectedness is here seen as an example. Though the sea salt industry covers large areas around the world, the salt ponds and marshes are an important habitat for many species like birds, shellfish, and macroorganisms. So all these agencies influence the ecosystem as a whole. As Morton puts it, all life forms are the mesh, and so are all the dead ones, as are their habitats, which are also made up of living and non-living beings.
Humans are required to shift perspective into a non-anthropocentric one. We've heard this a lot today also. And new forms of designing and relationships have to be found for the infrastructural networks we inhabit, and also the living ecosystems of which we're an integral part of. And we have to listen to the voices of other entities. This also means to integrate natural cycles into environments across different scales, as you can see within this scenario for Venice here. For Latour, every being has a voice in the democracy of the planet.
And when it comes to the notion of the Anthropocene, this project by Ecologic Studio called Anthropocene Island for the 2007 Tallinn Biennale shows how wilderness and infrastructures can form a hybrid aquatic ecosystem. Pathogens in urban wastewater are captured and remetabolized by biotechnologically designed ecosystems. Infrastructural networks thicken into filtering surfaces, which in turn fold into convoluted epidermis, populated by robotic farming devices and thousands of active microbial units. Each unit is fed by the city's wastewater and gives back natural gas, food, and fertile soil. The resulting contamination evolves into an urban digestive apparatus.
Contamination or disturbance opens the terrain for transformative encounters, making new landscape assemblages possible. So our impact on the ecosystem is vast and nearly irreversible. Nonetheless, disturbance also allows new agencies to thrive. Natural, artificial, and also complex elements that are connected in evolutionary and strategic action. Within Bortinsky's picture, we see beauty in this destruction. And for Tsing, aesthetics is understanding intelligences of species and their contamination of each other. Contaminated diversity is collaborative adaptation to human disturbed ecosystems. It emerges as the detritus of environmental destruction, imperial conquest, profit-making, racism, and authoritarian rule, as well as creative becoming. It is not always pretty, but it is who we are and what we have as available working partners for a livable Earth.
So photographer Tracy Cook calls this image stained. An industrial past leaves behind a kaleidoscope of colors in the Earth's surface. It was shot over an abandoned gold mine site in Australia. The colors are the remnants from the sifting process. Together as a set of agencies forming assemblages, we can never be sure of the consequences of our actions. They often also cause unintended effects. Bateson suggests that the whole base of how we define aesthetics needs to be re-examined and thought of as a meta-language between intelligence of species and their contamination of each other. He says, by aesthetics, I mean responsive to the pattern which connects.
And in our own research, as you have seen today, and studio projects, we also focus on the present notion of the Anthropocene, or rather on finding a non-anthropocentric mode of reasoning, as Pasquara and Pauletta state. Since our impact on the environment is so evident, more radical steps need to be taken to assist in the regeneration of ecosystems. The design process here followed Braden's idea of landscapes thinking about themselves. The patterns are represented by the agencies of the current and the branching system of the coral reef. By analyzing the current, benthic makeup, and bathymetry of a coastline, we were able to develop this artificial system, which mimics natural elements.
Then in The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anna Löwenhaupt-Singh, she makes it clear that assemblages of different species don't just gather lifeways, they make them. Bateson uses patterns to fundamentally explain relationships formed by agencies intersecting at their differences. In Mind and Nature, A Necessary Unity, he states, what pattern connects the crab to the lobster and the orchid to the primrose, and all four of them to me? This means that in the end, there is but one mutual pattern connecting all agencies on the planet.
So as we've heard, disturbance might initiate a story with new protagonists, humans and non-humans alike. And Morten discusses this in his metaphor of the mesh, while Donna Haraway and Löwenhaupt-Singh describe it as interconnectedness. For Singh, telling stories of landscape requires getting to know the inhabitants of the landscape through polyphonic assemblages. She calls it gatherings of ways of being. This image is also from our own research, showing different agencies interacting in interspecies relationship within our modern human world.
And another example of intersecting agencies is shown here. Instead of creating a boundary with water, this project embraces it and explores the marshlands created. The marshland becomes a biodiversity node that provides nutrients required by non-humans to grow. To connect the marshland properties to optimal habitat locations throughout the city, slime mold is used to approach a non-human-centered distribution. The terrain is explored with the machine learning to combine human and non-human entities into a more balanced coexistence in the marshland city.
The world cannot be perceived as a universal space containing all things or as a simple collection of objects, but must be seen as a site of metaphysical structure, a mixture. Everything depends on each other and everything has an effect. The flowers photographed by Craig Burrows using a technique called ultraviolet induced visible fluorescence photography reveals the world in a spectrum which we usually cannot see. Many assemblages are completely invisible to us.
To conclude that, having natural and artificial agencies in one system enables a dialogue that is built on their complexities, elements that are connected in evolutionary and strategic action. Therefore, landscape is something mutual. It cannot be just artificial, rather, it is the symbiotic creation of cohabitation. Donna Haraway calls this the human and non-human linked in tentacular practices, making with rather than self-making. These are challenges only addressed collectively and holistically.
And here comes our glossary, which is an assemblage of terms which support our definition of synthetic landscapes, representing concepts which can be referred back to when discussing landscape as well as architectural theory. So we have, for example, animal intelligence, an organism perceiving and reacting to sensory data. Various animal intelligences perceive environments in different ways. Incomprehensively, we interpret the physical world as the only real just because it is built on the basis of our senses and actions. However, The world for a Jacobin oyster, for example, is just movement, and the world for a bright jellyfish is just electricity. Amy or Steffi, do you want to read one?
I could, but not just yet.
Okay, sorry.
Entanglement, I will do that. Our everyday lives become increasingly entangled with data technologies, which manifest through the vast constellation of data centers, fiber optic cable networks, and energy grids that have come to populate its cities and suburbs over the recent decades. Also, there is an increasing interest in human-animal entanglement and their respective mutualism.
And then we have, for example, metaphysics. The world cannot be perceived as a universal space containing all things or as a simple collection of objects, but as a site of metaphysical mixture. Everything depends on each other and everything has an effect. The atmosphere is a sort of metaphysical space. Plants, in their history of evolution, demonstrate the living beings produce in the space which they live rather than being forced to adapt to it. They have modified the metaphysical structure of the world for good.
And on the next page, I think on the last page of our glossary, an interesting concept or term coined by Jane Bennett is Thingness. It's described as the nature of a material world and us in it, the same connectedness that Kochia mentions about immersion. And objects also have thing power, which is the curious ability of inanimate things to animate, to act, and to produce effects. Objects are alive because of their ability to impact the world even after they've been discarded. Everything is alive. It's alive. Vital materiality can never really be thrown away, for it continues its activities even as a discarded or unwanted commodity. An idea which humans should really benefit from greatly, and it maybe help us make some more decisions, some more conscious decisions in the future as well, and our impact on the planet. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, girls, for a beautiful presentation. I think it's a great moment to open the discussion on the project, and maybe also we could refer to some of the previous works if somebody
just so what's the end goal of the project? Where is this going to be taken?
This is to
the theory class.
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially, I think as a literary review, it is interesting in that you've done a successful job of effectively looking at quite diverse data, quite diverse publications, and extrapolating what I think are some really key points. I think foundationally it's good. I mean, I think my main comment would be that you could actually take everything that you've learned, everything that you've observed, and you can actually put it into something that in effect is going to crystallize what you've achieved through that. So it could be, for example, that you create a manifesto. Now, the manifesto may only be a couple of pages long, but it's essentially going to condense all of that learning into a tangible document that really that you can take away as a point of departure to use for something else. Certainly, you've clearly done a lot of research for it, but I think to make it really useful to you, it'd be good to actually produce something that is, if you like, beyond the review, beyond the glossary, and that is just sort of, if you like, a finale point that then compels you, it provokes you to think about how you're going to apply this. How is this going to influence your research and your practice? What, if you like, is the outcome of it? So I think that's the main thing, because if you were to finish a presentation like this with, for example, I mean, I think the way that it was structured was, it could have been a bit tighter. It would have really been good to have a sort of an introduction where you're generally, if you like, overviewing the process and what you actually did throughout this, what you aimed to achieve, where you thought the knowledge gaps were. And then, if you like, convey your methodology. How did you select the literature? You know, where were your literature gaps? What weren't you able within this research project to actually interrogate, and then to pull out the things that you found, you know, the quotes and the images, then to kind of curate that in the middle section, and then to come to a conclusion where you're pulling out, if you like, the highlights. Really think of this in terms of, you know, as you would a sort of standard keynote presentation, where there is a defined beginning, middle and end, and where at the start you, if you like, embark, you address the problem, you explain what it is you're going to do, then you explain how you research that problem, and then we have the conclusion at the end. And I think it would have probably been stronger if, rather than show visuals of your concluding, you know, your glossary and so forth, you actually had visualized that in the same way that you did the main bulk of the presentation, where you're pulling out a particular quote from your glossary and you're putting it against an image or something that contextualizes it. It would have looked more visually impactful for you. But, you know, good general piece of research. I think the presentation could have been a lot stronger. And I think really for you now, if you're going to take away what you really need to from this, you need to have a conclusion point. There needs to be, doesn't have to be a manifesto, it could be something else, but it's something that condenses this into something compact that is your launch pad to the next stage of your research journey.
Thank you.
I mean, I actually really enjoyed this presentation. I think you managed, I mean, if you read everything you presented today, you probably have read like a few thousand pages of very, very, very interesting things, which I really hope has formed, you know, your understanding of what I think your tutors and then generally the lab are kind of working around. I think it's a very compelling, very rich series of authors that you have there. And so I would just kind of, as a very first tip, I would just suggest you to, whatever you have read, whatever extract you've read for all of those books, to pick that on board and kind of keep expanding and keep understanding the impact of those authors on design. I mean, on what you're trying to, you know, you're studied forward towards. I think I agree with Melissa. What is, I think, is a bit missing here is I think whenever you are in the future at you know, engaging with a piece of research, you always need to kind of take at core, like, why, to answer a few questions: why, how, and what. So why are you, you know, telling us about these, first of all, and how are you going to do it? So the methods. Yes, I mean, I'm looking at this particular literature because nobody has done that before me, or because I need to reorganize this idea along this question, and so on. And I'm doing that by looking at specifically this school of thought or this series of authors that are connected in between them because of this or that reason. For instance, that would really kind of, I think what is really missing here is like, why you are kind of tapping that. Well, we have been told that we need to define what a synthetic landscape is. And so we are doing that by reading all these authors. We are doing that by understanding what's the concept of Anthropocene. And you are building around this idea quite nicely. I think it's just probably, it could have been a little bit more clear, yeah, in terms of setting up your aims for this presentation. But I mean, beside this, I think it's really like, I really enjoyed the depth that you got. I think I saw your presentation also like in the midterm, if I'm not mistaken. And I think I very much enjoyed that you started to relate this to some projects as well, and how, you know, those ideas can be reflected into like some work in progress, some practice. I mean, particularly this idea of the ecological thought and the cause-of-use in general, and how the different role of the human in this context, and what does it mean? I mean, you have kind of interrelated art discipline with photography, with architecture, with urban planning. I think this is has been very well done. So somehow, I think what you probably need to learn is that when you are kind of in the midst of putting together an argument, it's always kind of it's like a very complex mist. And you start with some assumption, and if you get at the end and you're actually answering exactly to the initial question, it's probably you haven't done your research right, because it means you haven't discovered everything new. But it's totally worth to kind of go back and reset those initial questions. So if you started to kind of say, well, what does it mean synthetic landscape? But then ultimately you ended up investigating the concept of Anthropocene and the relevance of Anthropocene and the impact on design practice and the urban design practice, then you could have reset those initial questions, because there's always need to be a fitting in between your argument and your expected outcome that you set at the beginning, so that you can conclude. And that's what is a little bit kind of missing here. But I mean, I really enjoyed the presentation. I mean, well done. And I hope that you can really take this, to the next step and really start to kind of develop this curiosity in this particular points that gather your interest into something that is yours and is therefore original.
Thank you.
So in between the different theory presentation we have seen, and we don't have, unfortunately, Ilaria here that was leading the course, I think for me this is one of the one that goes more in depth in trying to connect some of the theoretical concept of ecopoiesis rather than autopoiesis from Donna Haraway, as well as some of the discussion about polycephalon and synthetic landscape with the design realm. I think was part of the structure given by Ilaria to have a set of definition at the end rather than one single conclusion, so a multiplicity of definition. What I think is a little bit a missed opportunity for this group is that this group is composed of people that have two separate projects that are actually upon the best project we have seen in the last 2 days. And there is no one single image from your project here. So because you have worked also in design with us and visual languages for, maybe there is 1 or 2 images, but yeah, there are images from our, yes, I saw this one, but not from the other, yes, but I would have used just your images. And I wouldn't have used other material in this case, because you had the great advantage in comparison to other theory group that were not working this term with us on the design, or were not, or they were working one person in the group with us and the other not, like in the group we saw in the morning, that we had one pre-diploma student, but the other are not currently working with us, that you had a lot of material that you developed with us. And so you could have used your theoretical interrogation as a way of doing a step forward on the project. Of course, your theoretical investigation has contributed to the project, a little bit vice versa. I think it's happened more the other way around, but which is good. But on the other hand, I think you would have been able to give more depth if you would have taken your two projects, really analyze the difference and correlation between them, and use the material of these two projects to really make a theoretical argument. So in that sense, I think we would have, here we have a couple of images, but we, the project is much more. And this morning also with Rachel, we had a very long conversation about your project and also with Ilaria. So I think this is something I will discuss also with Ilaria. This is the first year she's with us. I think when we have this coincidence that we cannot force, because in Innsbruck we cannot have this correlation between theory and design that there is in other universities, or sometimes the student do design with us in one term and theory the other term. But when you are so lucky to have this correlation, then we need to use it to really understand what is our point of view on developing the definition of synthetic landscape by using the visual languages and the material and the technique that we develop.
I'd just add to that, I do think that the images of your work that you showed us were very, very strong. That's a stunning image that's on the screen right now. And I'd absolutely agree with Claudia. I think that this presentation, there really wasn't any need for you to be sharing lots and lots of images of other people's work. You know, you could have actually conveyed the insights that you had gleaned from this, you know, very diverse literary review, using your own work, maybe one or two images from other people, but really have confidence in the work that you're developing, and actually experiment with this, you know, this foundation of imagery that you already have, because it's rich and it's beautiful. And it, you know, particularly when you know, if you're presenting your work to people that are very familiar with this school of thought and with the works before them, they're going to be a lot more compelled and a lot more, you know, interested by your own work than sort of seeing the images of other people. So when you've got that skill, utilize it. And yeah, I think this is kind of a bit of a synergy issue. You know, you've got the stuff here, but it hasn't really come together as well as it could have done in the presentation. So I think you could definitely do this better. So take away the comments, work with your team, because it's there. It just needs to be reassembled, I think.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the presentation, comments. Again, I'm the bad policeman today, and I need to cut the presentation and welcome everybody for maybe some final comments. We finished with all the projects, and if anybody wants to jump in with the closing words.
Well, I think we had insightful couple of days, some moment more intense, some moment maybe more difficult. I think is clear that there is a struggle between being able to follow and develop technique, and then being able to use them not necessarily in a problem-solving framework, but by solving problem in a more complex manner. And so how can really design develop its own agency and therefore enable us to take different perspectives, non-anthropocentric, ecological, political, but without trying to break down the problem and then design it. I see this struggle in many of the groups that we have seen today, and I think this is a conversation that we need to pick on and develop from, you know, first year to PhD level on how really we develop a culture that doesn't segregate reality in this in its problematic, but actually develop a method to tackle the problematic and transform it. And this for me is a very important point. And yeah, whoever, I thank a lot the guests, Melissa, Narita now, Rachel and Miro and Ilaria and Jan before, but in the tutor and the student, we hope to see the students that they are interested in contributing to the debate, not in learning from us. Yes, we are teaching, but you need to contribute. That's the main things, because we don't know everything. And also we get bored of repeating the same things and we change every year. So we need your contribution. Actually, rarely get bored, but the world around me changes, so I need to adapt. But we need your contribution. So we need you. It's important that you learn the technique, but it's also important that you understand the context in which they are develop, what is the cultural context, what is the environmental context, what is the social context, what is the society we envision. It's not enough to learn the technique, but then how do you transform it? How do you criticize it? But in order to criticize a language, you need first to embrace it, to go deep into it. Once you are there, then we can entail in the conversation of how this can be transformed, and eventually, which is what interests me the most, how we can have an impact on a cultural level, on a transformative level in our city, on a political level. So how can we have an impact by developing these type of languages and methodology? Not simply having good project, but maybe something more than that. Okay. Thank you. If there are other remarks from the guest or the tutor or the student, welcome.
I'd just say, I mean, I think one of the big challenges of working with very complex information, working in the general field of systems, is that you are always in a situation where you can't possibly ascertain all the information, you can't possibly process it all. And as you're going along the journey of your research project, it's very easy to take a wrong step and find that you've reached a dead end, or that things haven't worked out quite as well as you'd hope. It's the sort of pattern that we saw today, where we saw some projects that are very, they're in a very good, in a robust situation. They've got, it's all lined up. Whereas others, need quite a lot of work, is one that I've seen time and again when addressing this kind of problem. So don't in any way feel, don't lack confidence just because your project, needs a bit more work, or it's a little bit less clear quite what your direction is compared to others. That's a natural part of the process. Most projects in this space actually find themselves at that point at some stage, and it's how you address that. And I think, yes, obviously take away from what your tutors and the guest lecturers and all the rest of us are saying to you, but also look at how your peer group have solved the problems, because amongst even just the selection of projects we had in this session, we had a lot of different methods, we had a lot of different ways of presenting and of assembling information. So take away, learn from the ways in which your peers have succeeded, learn from their failures. Again, look to the wider community, because you cannot possibly actually evolve and develop in this space unless you develop that practice. It's an inherent part of transdisciplinary work practice. So look at that, and when it gets difficult, know that the only reason it's difficult is because the level of ambition in the project that you're addressing, it's because you are taking on something that's really, really hard. If you weren't doing that, you wouldn't be encountering all these different challenges, and it would be easy as pie. But obviously that's not what you're here for. You're here for the difficult problems. You're here to develop a new school of thinking, to think about the new paradigms. So, be really positive about this. There was really interesting ideas that we saw today. We saw a lot of very good work. A really common theme was that we saw things, little tweaks that could have been made, that could have made something a lot better, weren't quite there. But now you know that, you've got the comments, and you can actually recalibrate your projects, and so that the next time you come to a presentation, boom, it's right on the nail, and you get all of that praise, and you feel really positive, and you think, yeah, I'm taking this up to the ascendant, and this is all good. So just, when we're tough on you, it's because we can see the potential in your projects, and we can see that with just that little bit of recalibration, they can really be a lot better.
Right, I'm just gonna add a couple of notes. I really enjoyed the day, and I really like this format where you can really see in like a few hours, like this sectional view of what's happening in the lab. And I think, I'm trying to kind of take your place, the place of the students. I would be extremely excited. I would be extremely excited to be able to kind of see what's happening just next to me, and here ahead of me, and the neighboring field, and how this whole things comes together and interrelate. I think, we've seen just 4 projects today, very interesting theory contribution, very rich, an excellent year to project with excellent methods, beautiful aesthetics. And then I think that the year 3 and year 4 projects, they were the one perhaps that they received a bit more critique, but not because they are less sophisticated than anything else, but because they seem to be, you know, at that point in time where they're just about developing a very, very critical idea, well, not one, but possibly multiple critical ideas in the sense of the intention, the political relevance, the cultural relevance, the technological, methodological, it all comes together. And so, and that's possibly why they are the projects that are more fertile to discuss about and to discuss like the relevance of the method, the point of view, how they can become really a project that critique what's, you know, our contemporary culture and propose models for future development, which are positive and inspirational. So I hope that from today you get, you know, good stimulation on how to really position those projects at the forefront, you know, in that strange position where they start to kind of be that well thought and articulated that they're really starting to challenge our perception of production, manufacture, urban planning, and design itself. So I'm really looking forward to see your things again, hopefully soon. As you know, I'm around these days, so it happens one way or the other. I'm so glad that I was here today. Thank you very much for all the effort. It was brilliant. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you also from my side to all the students, to all the groups, to all the projects, and for the full semester, which was, I think it was a great semester for me. That has been maybe one of the most challenging semesters, honestly, but I think we made a great step also in both methodology and some outcome. I also hope that we are at the step when we maybe find the way how we could create maybe a new bit of a new culture of education as well, when we try to find the way how we really can be hybrid, not only online, but also kind of finding the way how to move to the new way of teaching. And I think this semester for us was one of these steps. So thank you very much for the contribution. Yeah, and for all the comments that we heard today and also yesterday for the discussion. If Teresa, Vadim, Corby wants to add something on that, or students, if you want to give any feedback from your side.
Maybe I can add a little bit. So for me, it was the first semester when I started to teach in universities. So I'm really glad to see these results, and I'm really happy that in our study, especially, we found a way how to combine our different techniques and different efforts. And I think it's also speaking about hybridity. We always we're talking how different disciplines can work together, and we clearly see how using different techniques we can speak about maybe similar agenda but from a different sides. And I think in terms of research, it will give us some breakthrough pretty soon.
Okay.
I'm just going to keep it really short from my side. I just want to say thank you to all the students and also, of course, the guests and the whole team. I think it has been a really cool semester and a lot of great work from the outcome. And I'm really excited for next semester, how you're going to continue on that. So from my side, just thank you for these 2 days, really inspiring to me as well. And looking forward to the next steps.
Likewise, I would like to congratulate everyone. You have shown incredible amount of work, even sort of eagerness, almost obsession in some cases, really observing your topics and the systems that you are developing from various perspectives. And I especially look forward continuing on the projects with the T3 students, but because obviously having the chance to continue is really amazing. And as we always tend to sort of underline that the project, even though for some are sort of feeling like they are finished, they might never finish, and we would be glad to see you back at any stage of your study and continue the research. Thank you.
I see that nobody else wants to jump in, right? I'm trying to keep a bit of a moment now because we are almost finished. So in this case, I say